All right. Hello, hello. We are back. This is Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm Amanda,
I'm
and we've
Megan.
got Megan.
Oh,
Yep,
sorry. I
sorry.
jumped right in. I was like, hello, it's me.
Yes, exactly. And today we have our first guest, which we're super excited about. We'll get to Juliana here in a few minutes. But today's topic is the benefits of virtual co ops. So I actually find this really interesting because in our family, we have not co opted. We've done other types of things, and we've definitely been invited to in person co ops. And I always declined in person co ops because for me, it meant either A, I had to teach someone else's children, and I wasn't really about that. If I was doing a drop off class, I wanted to be able to drop my kid off and wave goodbye for a few hours. I didn't want to be stuck there with everyone else's kids. Or, like I prefer like pretty low commitment stuff. And the idea that I had to like say, I will for sure be up out of bed and dressed every Tuesday morning there and like with bells on in real clothes, like that's not going to happen in my world. And so I was like, yeah, I don't think so. We'll find other things. So this idea of a virtual co-op, like we do a lot of virtual things. I'm really interested to learn more about it. So to start off the episode, we'll start with what is a co op? I think you probably have more insight on that, Megan. You guys have done a lot more co oping. Is that even a word?
We have co-opt. Yeah, we'll make it into any form of speech we want to here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. The rules don't apply. We have co-opt. Juliana, have you so Juliana was homeschooled as a child and now homeschools her kids. So she is like legacy homeschooler. This is pretty awesome. So we have co-opt. Have you co-opt, Juliana?
We haven't done, I think, what homeschoolers would consider traditional co-ops. We've done some half-day programs that are a lot more loosely defined than co-ops. They are drop-off programs, which is also what I tend to need with my 3 kids. So traditional co-ops, I have not done.
There you go. And we have Juliana on as our guest today because she is leading one of the virtual co-ops that we'll be talking about. But we've done co-ops in a number of forms. We have moved, we've lived in 4 states for my husband's job during our homeschool journey. So that's been interesting. Every time you land somewhere new, trying to build a new community and start from scratch. And so we tried a co-op in Florida when we were new homeschoolers, and it was very schooly. My kids did not love it. Then we went to North Carolina and we found there were a ton of co-ops, but we were excluded from most of them. In North Carolina, most of the homeschool co-ops required a statement of faith. And if you could not align exactly with that statement of faith, you were not welcome to join. And it was interesting because even people who I consider to be religious Christian people were excluded from the statement of faith. So we ended up finding a co-op that I used to refer to as the land of misfit toys. It was everyone who was excluded from the other co-ops for whatever reason. And it was a wonderful thing in the end because it represented reality. It was a melting pot. We had people who were there who were Mormon, who were Catholic, who were Jewish, who were atheists, who were Christians, who just wanted a less than homogenous environment for their kids. So we had this beautiful melting pot of kids, and the co-op was massive. I mean, we were holding classes in hallways. We had run out of space because there were a lot of people who were in the land of misfit toys who were being excluded in other ways. So that was our experience there. In Texas, when we lived there, we didn't join a co-op because we moved to Texas in June of 2020, and most things were shut down. There was a co-op that continued to run throughout the entire pandemic, and they didn't have a rule. So, it wasn't like they set a rule that said like you can wear a mask or not wear a mask, like do whatever's comfortable for you. We're meeting outdoors, and then people had it up to their own judgment to decide. The one co-op that was still running had a no mask rule that they wouldn't allow them at all. So those weren't our people because we believe in science. We were thinking, this is not our place. So, and all the other co-ops were on hiatus because of COVID. We ended up being transferred from Texas right as kind of things were starting to pick back up. So we never had an opportunity there. And now we live in South Carolina, and my kids are a little bit older, and there is only one secular co-op that's here, and it's mainly for younger kids. So there isn't really anything for my kids as older teens. So I too am in love with the idea of a virtual option where they can meet kids from all around the world and really explore diversity. But co-ops can look a variety of different ways. They can be sometimes they're drop off, sometimes it's parents stay and parents are teaching. I think the initial origin of the word, I mean, it's cooperative, right? So the initial origin of the word was all the parents coming together. And I say, I'm really good at baking. I'll teach a baking class. And Juliana says, I speak French. I'll teach French. And, Amanda says, I'll teach a current events class because I'm really big into, world events and things like that. And I think that's the origin of co-op, but it has morphed, right? Now, sometimes people kind of form a pod of kids that learn together. They call that a co-op. Sometimes it's a drop-off thing. We call that a co-op. So I think co-ops can look a lot of different ways now, even though they kind of started as one thing, from what I can tell.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. So I think we kind of all covered what sort of co-op experiences we've had. Has anyone in here done a virtual co-op yet? Actually been a part of a virtual co-op yet? No?
I haven't. My middle schooler is signed up for one with Juliana this fall, which I'm super excited about. So that's how we've kind of been able to connect and bring Juliana in today. He signed up for a middle school co-op, which I'm super excited about. They're going to be doing all sorts of different exploration. They're going to be doing art history. They're going to be doing Shakespeare, and just exploring, right? Learning, exploring, and interests. And it's going to be a really cool experience. So I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
Well,
Yeah.
and this is new for me too, in the sense that I've taught online before, and I've taught my own children, and I've taught classes of children. I've never done this specific thing, but it's a gap that needs to be filled. It existed when I was a kid, for sure. When I was homeschooling, we had similar issues to you, Megan, where my parents could be defined as conservative Christians. And even they didn't feel comfortable with the co-ops and what they were offering because they were homeschooling for academic reasons, not for religious reasons. And that didn't exist in the South. We were in Georgia. It just simply didn't exist. And of course, those were the days of dial-up, and we didn't have any online options, really. So when I was a teenager, the technology had advanced to the point where we were able to enroll in an online Great Books course with this fantastic teacher, and it was kids from all over the United States. And so I've had the experience of being in an online class from about the heyday of online classes, and loved it. It was so great. We were allowed to chat as long as we weren't interrupting the class, and we got to know some of them I'm still in touch with to this day. So I'm excited to sort of expand this, because I think those were maybe hour-long classes, and of course the online co-ops are much, much longer. Like a true co-op. They last a good portion of the day.
Mm-hmm. It is exciting. I think it's interesting. And we have Amanda and I have a mutual friend who said the same thing, that she's one of the people in her area that's homeschooling for academic reasons, not for religious reasons. And it kind of ostracizes her in her area, even though she too is a religious person. But just that one difference in approach to homeschooling. And Amanda, you brought it up in some of our previous episodes. We homeschool completely differently. You're allowed to hang out with people who do things differently than you. It's okay. It doesn't violate any rules, right? And yet for some reason in the homeschool space, there's these really rigid definitions of who's allowed to be together for some reason. And it's just not mirroring how the world actually works. When our kids get out into the real world, they're going to be interacting with all kinds of people. We might want to prepare them for that. Just a thought.
Yeah. That's so one of the reasons I homeschool, sort of this idea of what's your job as a parent, is to prepare your kids for the real world. And I was talking to a non-schooler or an unschooler who had a very specific way of unschooling. Of course, there are as many ways to unschool as there are to do homeschooling itself. And I mentioned something about Shakespeare. We were memorizing Shakespeare with my 5-year-old, which they can do. Kids can do it. They can do it. And the dad looked at me and just went, well, I don't really know what's the point of, who needs to know who Shakespeare is? And I just sort of went, well, other than the Bible, he's kind of foundational in the way that the English language has developed. So I feel like everybody should know about Shakespeare. But that's the sort of stuff that I've run into, and I'm very open to different viewpoints. I am, but there are some things where I just go, I think there's sort of a baseline just of awareness that kids need to have, and that's sort of where I'm coming from.
I agree. And we're unschoolers, so I would approach teaching Shakespeare maybe differently. My kids know who Shakespeare is. They know some of his more famous works. They've seen remakes of movies based upon his work where it's kind of been modernized. We've been to the Globe Theatre in London, so we didn't memorize lines of Shakespeare, but we did it our way. I mean, you can still explore it. We were going to be in London, so ahead of our trip, we did a little prep work. We watched Shakespeare in Love, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. We read some plays, we explored some of the tragedies. But we did it just fun, organic, light, easy. But yeah, I agree. There's kind of a foundational element. Amanda brought up the other day something in one of our discussions, and I forget what we were talking about, but you mentioned Peter Pan, and you were mentioning your kiddo reading it. Now I'm realizing that wasn't a podcast episode. That was just us chatting. But anyway,
Maybe.
and you had kind of said, like, my kiddo there's a lot of cultural references to, Peter Pan, Neverland, The Lost Boys, right? Kind of people use those culturally. And Shakespeare is the same. There's entire lists that go around on the internet about words and phrases that we use today that come directly from Shakespeare. And so just kind of knowing those origins is pretty awesome. Just makes you a more well-rounded person, if nothing else.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm just going to say that I do think that the co-ops that you guys are talking about, and that I don't think my kiddo would like the middle school one that yours has signed up for. But when I looked at them, I was like, man, I wonder if I could slip in a 10-year-old into one of those high school history ones, because he would eat that up, right? I won't. I realize that it would totally change the dynamic, and the chances of him making a friend in that situation are a lot lower. And that would be really the main goal. But I did go online and look at some of the offerings, and it was like, oh yeah, he would love that. It's a great idea, the way that it comes together. And it's an even bigger bonus that the goal is for them to also make friends, right? Because that's hard. I mean, homeschooling is growing, and there are more homeschoolers out there to go out and connect with, but it's still a small percentage of the population. And to find your person in your town, in your small homeschool group, in the small group that you're accepted into, not even the whole homeschool group of people where you live, it's pretty slim, the chances of really finding those connections. And I will say we've made some friends, but we haven't made best friends in the homeschool community. And so it's hard. Another option, another place. Well, I mean, I guess that kind of rolls into what my next question was going to be. When are virtual co-ops an asset? I in lots of situations, I'm sure, but kind of in your mind, where do you think that they are most useful?
And you're asking me or Megan?
I'm asking whoever wants to answer.
Oh, okay. Megan, you looked like you're about to say something. You go
My
first.
mouth is going. I can speak personally and say that moving often for my husband's job has been, my kids are fine. They're happy. They're well adjusted. But there is an element of starting over every time. So I feel like in the community of people, military families, world schooling families, people who are like us who end up just getting transferred a whole bunch, there's that element of stability that I feel like I'm hoping to gain from these co-op options, where if we end up here, there, and everywhere, my kids don't have to work really hard, to your point, Amanda, to find like one or two people within the community that we're finally maybe possibly accepted into that they might get along with. They've got a much bigger option, a much bigger net that's been cast. I mean, it's a global co-op. So you could find kids that have the same interest as you from all over the place. So for me personally, I love that idea. And I don't mind teaching at co-op, but as my kids have gotten older, my time is much tighter. They need more, they're busier. I thought it would get easier somehow. That was really delusional, right? But it's not. Their needs have gotten bigger and the stakes have gotten bigger. And so the option to not have to be required to teach, even though I don't necessarily mind it, but to be able to gain back 4 hours of my week would be amazing.
So I have a quick question about how you foresee these going. Do you hope that at least some kids move from one co-op, like this semester's co-op, into next semester's co-op, so that there's a bit of a cohort or kind of like friendships that continue? Because I will say that's one struggle we have. We do online classes, we do some without school, but we also use Athena's Advanced Academy and the Johns Hopkins CTY program. And the biggest struggle with all of those is that even if he finds someone he likes, right, once that class ends, they never really end up in class together again. And so being able to form a friendship, I mean, I feel like you need more than an online semester to really have a good friendship. So do you envision them, ideally kind of continuing on? Or is there some flexibility that'll work for some people and not for others? Or is it set so that it's the same kids all for a whole year?
I think it can be. What do you think, Juliana? I think it can be where it would continue. And I mean, if it's working and it's jiving, who would want to stop? It's going to be so much fun.
Well, I'm sort of pulling from my experience with the Great Books course that I did, and we did it over 2 years, and it was a year-long program. But between the 2 years, at least half of the class, they're large classes. I think there are probably about 20 kids in them. About half of them would be kids who had been there the previous year, and those are the ones the second year we actually kind of created a group of people we had gotten to know, and we separated out into I don't know if we were on Gmail or something. We created an emailing list, and we were exchanging writing. We were writing books, and we had this, I think it was like about 10 kids all in this email group, and we would just send our writing to each other and we'd critique it, and that came from that group, from that first year kind of getting to know each other, and then the second year getting to know each other even better. So I would not be surprised if that's how it ended up, that you have kids who do well and who appreciate it, and it really jives with them, and they come in the next semester and the next year as well. I mean, I sort of anticipate that would happen if I do a good job. So
Well, and I was looking at the history course that you referenced, Amanda, and it says that it's from 1900 to 1950, which is such an incredible, I'm a history nerd. I mean, that's just one of the meatiest times in history. But it said at the bottom of the description that the spring semester would cover 1950 to 2000. So I guess, yeah, that thought is that those kids would carry through and be able to do that. But yeah, and form those friendships and form connections and find your people, it's hard to do. It's hard as a grown-up. Right? And then we put it on kids. Go find your people. It's like, oh, I can't even find my own people. Right? It's tough. I don't want to jump on, Juliana, do you have any thoughts of like who benefits from the virtual environment? I very selfishly thought of the ways I would benefit from the virtual environment, but are there other things that you've thought of?
Well, I mean, I had sort of a similar experience to you. My parents were involved in with refugees in Europe for a while when I was a kid, and we were sort of split between homeschooling and going to the public school system there. And then we moved 2 or 3 times when we got back to the States. And so I definitely identify with that sense of you just feel uprooted and just lost a lot of the time. I had formed some pretty deep friendships in France and Luxembourg, and those, we kept up over email, but for the most part, it was just this constant having to start over, and it's just your little family pod that's with you, that's consistent, and everything else changes. So I think that's probably a big one for people who like the flexibility of being able to go places. Even people who like to move around locally and go and visit family, or you have elderly family members or family members who are having babies or whatever it might be, that you have that freedom to go and just pick up and leave, and your kid's not going to miss weeks and weeks of their co-op because your computer comes with you. So I think that's a huge one, and I that's kind of what I expect to see a lot of, speaking from my personal experience with my kids. And I think a lot of moms identify with this, is needing to be all things to everybody all the time. And this is one of the things I've learned with my my oldest child. He's going into 3rd grade. He's still pretty young, but I hit that point with him where I can't do all the things he wants to do. I don't have the expertise. I don't have the experience. I don't have the passion for a lot of it. I mean, we're pretty committed to, more of the classical education. And I sat down and started learning Latin so that I could teach it to him. And it took me about 2 months of getting through Adler's massive book to go, there is no way I'm going to be able to do this, because I'm mostly a solo parent. My husband's a concertizing pianist. He's almost never home. 90% of the parenting and childcare and everything else falls on me. And so I hit that point where I went, I need to outsource, and I need to outsource to people who have a similar vision and who are passionate about the things they're teaching, because I don't want to try to do everything and just give my kid kind of a blah education about history, which is not my strength. I love it, but that's not my strength if I'm going to just dedicate to one child. And so that's sort of that's a big part to me, is sort of getting the parents to go, hey, I'm not great with math, or I'm not great with the writing stuff, or whatever it might be, and to be able to find somebody who can do that for them. That's huge too. That's really, it's good to know your strengths and to have options when there are certain areas where you don't have those strengths. We already talked about the sort of the exclusionary aspect of certain co-ops that are local to a lot of us. And sort of also depending on your beliefs, they might also feel unsafe. So there's that, which we touched on. The people who are living rurally, who would have to drive 45 minutes. And I know that some of the programs my children are in, there's a Waldorf program and a forest school program, which is phenomenal. There are parents who drive 45 minutes to an hour to attend those because they live so far out, and there's nothing local to them. And then you have the kids who just are insatiable, which is a little bit like my 7-year-old, who just I cannot give him enough books to read. I cannot provide him with enough material. He goes through it so fast. And I want to put a lot of attention into what I'm giving him. So I'm not just going to throw stuff at him. And at some point, I've actually just run out of time to provide what he's asking for. And so, some kids might be in a local co-op, but they want more. That co-op doesn't offer something. And you can find that online. You have the online option for that. So I think I covered a lot. Hopefully I covered most of it, but that's, there are a lot of reasons I think that this could be useful. Yeah.
I'm also going to say that you're basically a walking billboard for our book club, because book club talks so much. This specific book that we're covering right now talks about the importance of the passion in what you're teaching, and how if you have passion for what you're learning with your kids or what you're hoping to share with them, like they pick up on that and they're more likely to learn it. Right. And so if you don't have the passion for something and yet you're trying to be like, okay, we're going to learn this, like it's not very inspiring. Right. So an interesting connection. Anyway, I'm going to pass it over to you, Megan. I think because you have a little bit more of an understanding of how this all works, I'm mostly going to listen and hopefully learn some more about virtual co-op so that we're ready to dive in ourselves.
I know, maybe our kids will end up in co-op together someday. That would be awesome, right?
That'd be fun.
Co-op with a kid from San Diego. No big deal. So real quick, I was thinking while you were talking to Juliana about when I was working. So when my kids were younger, I was a full-time working parent. We had 3 kids under 4. So we had a nanny, because it's actually cheaper to have a nanny than it is to send 3 kids to daycare. I wouldn't have been able to pull off homeschooling, having the kids go to co-op or things like that, with the work schedule that I was trying to balance while full-time parenting at the same time. And so I see a lot of parents who are working full-time, but making homeschooling work because it's what they feel is best for their child. And their kids being able to go to daytime events is part of that sacrifice. So having that happen during the day and having the kids can just log on, and they're not just logged on to something, they're logged on to something amazing where they're really engaged and sparked and interested, which would be a pretty awesome thing. When I was a full-time working parent, that would have been a massive solution for me. But I did laugh a little bit when you said you're not just going to throw anything at your kid to read, because I totally did that. And I will never forget, we were on a car trip one time, and my little guy, oh my goodness, he was probably 5. And he was listening to an audiobook in the car, and he paused his book and he asked my husband and I what a concentration camp was. And he was like, what on earth is that child reading? And I said, it's an I Survived book. I don't know. I said, he finished all the Jack and Annie, all the Magic Tree House. And I said, Jack and Annie talked about D-Day. So I figured the I Survived Nuremberg thing would be like along the same lines as Jack and Annie. Turns out not so much. He was asking us questions about barbed wire and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, my husband's like, what on earth did you give the kid? But he was so insatiable. And I was so frazzled and so overwhelmed that I just kept, I put more books in there. I downloaded more books. Keep reading, right? So you're doing a great job at screening the books from.
No, you're saying that. You're saying that, and it's reminding me that we had somebody gift us a set of Shakespeare books that I thought I thought they were just sort of old English adaptations for younger readers. I think they're meant for middle schoolers, and I know you're familiar with them, Megan, because we talked about this. And I just handed the set to him, because, and it was, it's almost the full set of plays. So you got all the tragedies in there too. And I thought, I just didn't check. I thought surely it's in Old English because I guess I haven't adapted to modern times. No, it wasn't. And my, he reads at like a fourth grade level, and he read through all of them and started bringing the books to me. Excuse me, started bringing the books to me and sort of self-selecting which ones were appropriate and which weren't. He's like, "Mom, this one's scary." I think he was 6 at the time. "This one's scary for me." And then they were playing murdering and stabbing and dying and poisoning. And I mean, it was just, so I thought Shakespeare was safe. Maybe not for a 6-year-old, maybe some of them.
But that is so, most of my books, my kiddo is also insatiable, reads a ton. And I pull lists all the time, either online lists of, like for kids reading at this level, for kids in this grade, but they're reading advanced things, try these books. And then I'm in different Facebook groups and I'm always pulling recommended lists, and I have a running list of books that we're going to get from the library or whatever. And I had, he was probably 8, and we were out in public because these things always happen out in public. He says, "Mom, what is marijuana?" And I was like, gosh, like, where'd you, okay, I'm going to need a little bit more context, like, where's that from? And it was, of course, from the book that he was reading that's award-winning and well-received and supposed to be age-appropriate. And so we had a very long and interesting talk about what marijuana is and how you correctly pronounce it, and also just, but that thing, even when you're doing your best, interesting things happen.
You're going to have those moments, right? Those are the messy moments that we talk about.
Yep.
So, yes, and I agree, always in public. My son asked me on a public bus when we were in London. We were talking about Henry VIII and how it was a shame that he killed all his wives for not giving him a male heir when it was him who was determining the sex of the baby we know now. And we were on the bus and he must have been noodling it the whole ride back from the museum. And he said, "How does the dad's body tell the mom's body what gender to make the baby? Like, how does that even work?" And this guy on the bus next to us kind of snickered and was like, "She's in for a day." I'm like, "I got this." I said, "We'll discuss this when we get back to our room." So yeah, curious minds, right?
Oh yeah,
right? It's great.
They're
will
learning
in the real world. Yes.
I love it.
So speaking of curiosity, I am curious, Juliana, what does a virtual co-op day look like? What do you all have planned for the fall?
Well, so I'm teaching a middle school and a high school co-op. And basically how we're doing it is we're breaking it up into sections. So there's basically an hour per broad subject. And within that hour, we'll usually cover several different things. Two big blocks, so 2 hours. And then we have an hour break and then 2 more hours after that. And I mean, we squeeze a lot in there. It's for the middle schoolers, the pace is a little bit faster. We move through things a little bit more. It's a lot more broad, the subjects that we cover. Just for the sake of middle schoolers figuring out what they love to do and what they're interested in. And a lot of brain breaks, pauses, chances to absorb the information and ask questions and all that. And for the high school, it's a little more specialized. So this is really for the lit kids, the writers, all the stuff that I'm just a super nerd about, book club. The pace is obviously not quite as segmented for the high schoolers, but we provide a lot in there for brain breaks as well, because you look at the research for even adults that smaller segments of learning, the way that the brain intakes information and the long-term memory and how it stores it, it's so much more effective to just do little blocks of learning and do those consistently throughout the day than just trying to like overload in one fell swoop,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm super excited about it. The whole thing seems amazing. And I actually had some other questions jotted down to ask you. I was going to ask you about like how you make learning fun, but I totally got that from what you just said. And I saw there's a lot of hands-on activity in the co-op, which I was super excited about. I have a neurodivergent learner and he was taking a class on OutSchool, an ADHD body doubling class where they they work in 10-minute segments and they set a goal, something that's typically challenging for them. And there's kind of this group support. It's a passive form of support where everybody's just silently kind of working on their own project. but something that they've been putting off or dreading or avoiding. So having this group environment and this bit of support. And he used to be an absolutely insatiable physical book reader. He liked audio and physical books. And I don't know if it's tween life or hormones or whatever, or just human development, but his ADHD has reached a point where it's really, really challenging for him to read a physical book anymore because it requires being still in so many other ways. And that doesn't really work well for him. He can listen to a book because he can be playing pickleball and riding his bike and running around or bouncing on the trampoline and be absorbing information while moving. And with physical books, that's a little bit more challenging. So that was his goal in the ADHD body doubling class, was to get through one chapter of this book that he was wanting to read. And it was a 10-minute timer, and I happened to be there. We weren't at home, so he was taking class and we were sitting together. And I think he made it 6 minutes before he started asking me whacked out questions about the shapes of clouds. And I was like, you got 10 minutes, pal. You can do this, right? So it was just kind of, I was like, all right, he might need a shorter timer for something like that. So I was excited to see in the co-op for a kid like him, who does need a lot of stimulation and a lot of different forms of stimulation all at the same time in order to be able to focus effectively, how much hands-on activity that there is in the co-op that you have planned for the fall. Is there a component of some of the hands-on stuff that you're most excited about?
Well, I mean, sort of along the lines of the having a kid with ADHD, and frankly, even kids without ADHD, just the whole sitting still for X amount of time. I can't. Maybe I have ADHD. I mean, I haven't gotten tested. I maybe check off a few too many boxes to have not gotten tested, but I can't sit still for that long. And it's like, I used to teach piano. I used to be a pianist, and it's just, I can't do it. So I think for anybody, just let's talk about effective learning. Why are we trying to make people sit still for so long and focus on one subject for so long? I mean, I have a stack of 5 books going at a time, and it's usually a biography and fiction and nonfiction. And, I mean, it's just self-help, whatever. And I'll read 5 pages of one of those each night, and I'll just bounce, what am I in the mood for? So there's that aspect that I think the thing that I'm most excited about is this kind of the student-led learning aspect, where the students are they're encouraging each other because they're allowed to talk and they're allowed to throw around ideas. That the discussion that happens between the students, to me, is so important. And of course, I'm there to sort of hopefully keep it from diverting too far into the clouds. But that, to me, is really where, in the more traditional setting, you have to keep students on task very specifically, because you have to get through this. And the way that these are scheduled, the schedule's not tight. We do fit a lot into those blocks, but it's not tight where if we don't stick to the minute to the schedule, that we're going to get derailed. There's time built into it for that flexibility and for the kids to actually get to know each other and to sort of figure out each other's learning styles and all that. So I honestly, to me, that's sort of the most exciting thing to be able to provide, and also to see. It's so exciting to see students do that and sort of break out of their shells and especially the kids who have sort of been slapped on the hand for not fitting into that box. When they find an environment where they're allowed to do that and they discover, my goodness, it's not a flaw, it actually works. I didn't have the environment for it. So maybe that may be the part that I'm really, really looking forward to. Yeah.
I'm excited for you. I think we'll have to have you come back on in December, and you can give us like your 5 favorite moments of co-op from the semester, okay, right? And tell us how it all went, because Amanda and I don't get to attend. We're not middle schoolers or high schoolers, so we'll have to live vicariously through your fun when you tell us how it all went. Okay. We are fortunate enough to have a coupon code for the co-op that is valid until the end of June. We will put it in our stories and in our story highlights on Instagram. You can DM us for the code. It is OFCUR140. CURE, CUR140. And that is good for $40 off co-op enrollment for the fall semester. So super exciting, Juliana. Thank you for sharing all of your information about co-op with us, and also a coupon code, because who doesn't love a coupon?
Yeah. You're welcome. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we, as a new podcast, have been introducing our segments. We've done our messy moments segment. We've done our student spotlight, our recommended resources. We have One more specialty segment. Was this like a best for last kind of thing, Amanda, that this is our final one?
Maybe.
So when Amanda and I spent hours and hours brainstorming the perfect podcast that is something that we as homeschool parents have looked for but haven't been able to find, we decided to leave nothing off the table. And so without further ado, I don't even think I'm going to introduce it. I'm just going to play the jingle. What do you think, Amanda?
I say go for it. Push the
Okay,
button.
here we go.
Am I the asshole? Tell me. I just have to know.
Okay. How many times in all the homeschool Facebook groups do we see, I'm having this problem with a neighbor's kid or a mom at co-op or whatever. Am I overreacting? Am I the asshole?
Mm-hmm.
And looking for that opinion and that feedback. So normally we would solicit from the audience, etc. But when we were planning our session with Juliana today, she has an Am I the Asshole scenario for us. I'm so excited. So you are our inaugural potential asshole on the podcast, Juliana.
Yay.
So you want to lay your scenario on us? Let's see what you've got.
Absolutely. Yes. We all have a little bit of an asshole in us, don't we? Okay. So one of the programs that my kids go to, it's an amazing place. The teachers are really great. And usually after the program, we all sit outside. There's a playground. And we'll chat. One of the moms likes to call it the what's in your crockpot chat, because that's really all people really talk about. No, everybody's too scared to talk about politics and all the bigger issues. So we talk about what we're cooking and, what we're sewing and all that. So this is definitely a community. This is a Waldorf inspired school. Or it's a half day program, 1 day a week. And a lot of the parenting there definitely leans more towards, I think most of them would identify as gentle parents, which what I've noticed, their interpretation of that tends to be no setting boundaries for their children. And I'm really big on the boundaries, probably because I solo parent 3 young children. And that's kind of one of the ways I've survived. So we were just sitting, watching the kids play, and suddenly the horn behind us starts just blaring, like 2 feet away from us. And I look over, and it's a kid I know. We've hung out with the parents before, and the mom I'm talking to doesn't say anything, and it happens again, and it happens again. And I stand up and I said, I know the kid, so I don't think it's going to frighten them if I go over to them. And I had an eyesight down to where their mom was sitting, just very happily chatting away, doing nothing about it. I just thought, okay, well. So I went up to the window and I said, hey, so did you know that car horns are for emergencies only? And you're scaring people. So you can't do that anymore. You can't honk your mom's car's horn. And if you keep doing that, I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to carry you over to her. And they stopped. That was it. That was literally it. We had sat, no more problem. And they got bored 2 minutes later and left the car. And that was the end of the story. I did not go and ask the mom's permission to do that with her child. So yeah, that's the question. Did I have enough of a right to go and speak to that child and set a boundary for them or not?
Dun, dun, dun. What do you think, Amanda?
Well, I would say you're not the asshole. If you had picked the kid up and carried them over to their mom, my answer might have been a little different, right? The whole touching the child that's not yours when it wasn't an immediate emergency, it would have been different. But, I think we've all done that, especially with the communities, when it's a community, right? If it's a kid you don't know, it's a little bit different to be parenting. But a lot of times when you have built a community, there's a lot of shared parenting. And, like when you see a kid about to hurt themselves or about to hurt someone else, you kind of intervene. And it is hard, right? Because you're always walking that line between like, well, how much can I say and how much can I help parent this other child in this immediate moment? And am I overstepping? And I don't know. I mean, in your case, I'm not sure I would have been quite so nice, and I'm not positive that I would have remembered to say horns are for emergencies. I would have been more like, stop,
Get off,
damn horn.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you handled it really well. I feel like I really want to know what was in that mom's crock pot. If she couldn't leave the conversation, she might not have even heard it. I mean, I feel like there's a component of people will always judge you at your worst kind of thing, right? And so we've all had probably less than stellar parenting moments in public that have occurred. But it wasn't a horrible, like, to go over and say something like I totally probably would have said the same thing, because I feel like there's this component too of understanding society as a whole. I'm a big fan of not everyone wants to hear your noise. And I think when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I lived in Miami Beach, and this was before AirPods. And so this concept of bringing a boom box to the beach with you. So you'd be laying on your towel and you'd have one style of music here, one style of music here. And I'm like, I just want to lay here and read my book. Shut up. Right. I mean, not everyone wants to hear your noise. And now I think the 2024 equivalent of that is people who use their speakerphone in public. So they're just blabbing away in a doctor's waiting room or an elevator or a restaurant, just blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we flew on a flight from Miami to Buenos Aires earlier this year. And the gentleman behind us on the plane watched stuff on his cell phone the entire 9-hour flight without earbuds. And so I feel like your example, Juliana, is like a really small microcosm of that societal issue, right? That other people would like to hear my noise, and just to understand that this is a shared space. And so some people really like to come here for serenity, and I'm one of those people. So,
Yes.
so
Yeah. I mean,
tone it down.
this is one of the things that I do with my kids, where I'll remind them, we're out in public. You're allowed to have these feelings. You're allowed to cry. But if you start wailing, we are going to remove ourselves to the bathroom until you're done with that noise, because nobody needs to hear that. Like, nobody else is your mom. Nobody else has to put up with that. So, that's a big one for me, is what noise you create that other people just can't help. Even in the car, I'll go, we're all stuck in here together. We don't have a choice but to be here. So we're actually going to be nice to each other,
Yeah. So I feel like there's a component of that. I mean, maybe this mom is, stellar mom, 99, and she was just having a really crappy day, right? And she's just like, I can't, they're quiet. They're not quiet, but they're leaving me alone. Right. And we've all had those moments. I get it, but I don't think it was wrong then. Also, if she is in that situation where she's having a really crappy day and she's super overwhelmed, the fact that you made the noise stop and she didn't have to make the noise stop, like, you kind of accomplished the end result, but without it having to involve her. That's that whole thing. I mean, we hear all the time about, like, it takes a village and all that, right? So it's okay sometimes, as long as you do it politely and respectfully, to be part of someone else's village, I think. I was remembering, and it ties into our conversation about co-op perfectly. We would have pizza orders at our co-op when we were in North Carolina. You just had to let somebody know by Wednesday, and it came from Papa John's or something, and it was $2 a slice. So a lot of people brought their lunch, but then a lot of people would order pizza too. And I remember I was out on the playground. There was a really nice playground at the facility, and I was out chatting with some moms on the playground. And this one mom, Kathy, who I adore, came out, and she was like, do not mess with Kathy in this moment, because the teens had gone into one of the classrooms and eaten pizza in one of the classrooms, and they left pizza boxes and crumbs and napkins and stuff. And we rent that facility. We were in a church facility. We were renting it. And it was important to us to keep the facility and to have our access to it for co-op. And she came out, she rounded up every single one of those kids. None of them were hers. She rounded up every single one of those kids and made sure that room got cleaned up, and she had an air of, this is going to get fixed and it's not up for discussion, but she wasn't mean about it. She doesn't have a mean bone in her body. So, I think you actually approached it a lot more gently, especially they were smaller too. So it was probably more age appropriate, but I don't think you're an asshole, Juliana.
Yay.
But thank you for being our first Am I the Asshole segment contributor. I'm excited about it.
I love it.
Good stuff. All right. Amanda, you want to close us out with our mantra for the week?
I will. So I'm actually going to preface this before I say the mantra. We are real big in our family of saying a mistake is only a mistake if you don't learn anything from it. And I feel like that perfectly ties in with this week's mantra. So this week we've got, learning is an adventure and failure is just a plot twist on our epic journey to success.
I like it. It is true. There will be failures along the way. I've also heard kind of the concept of failure, that if you're not failing, you haven't tried hard enough, which there's some nuance to that, of course, right? But if you're never really pushing yourself out of your comfort zone enough to fail, maybe some of the choices are a little bit on the safe side. So failure can be amazing in a lot of ways. It's a sign that you're really striving and really pushing, which is awesome.
I think we have to expect it too. I think that's probably one of the things, especially as a teacher, to go, hey, so mistakes, that's going to be our entryway into learning. We've got to make them. I was listening to a TED Talk where they said that the biggest determiner of success was grit. So that ability to just keep going when it got hard, and just to keep your eyes on where you're trying to go and just not give up. And you have to make a ton of mistakes if you've got grit, right? You just keep making them. Yeah.
I love that. I'm a TED Talk fanatic myself. I love them. All right, friends. Well, this is the conclusion of this week's episode. Our next episode is going to be a fun one. We're going to have a real life homeschooler as our guest next week. Not a grown up homeschooler. Juliana's a real life homeschooler too, but we're going to have a junior version next week. And our topic for the week next week is, why are homeschooled kids called weird? We talked a little bit about it in our top 10 myth busting series. We talked a little bit about the origins of weird versus normal and typical and all of those things, but we're going to dig in a whole lot more in next week's episode of Why Are Homeschooled Kids Called Weird? So we hope you tune in. Our next episode, our part 2 for this week here, week 4, will be our book club episode. You do not need to read the book to listen to the book club episode. We will tell you the highs and lows, and boy, do we have some thoughts this week. Do we, Amanda?
We have thoughts. I sent Megan a message last night that said, whoa, buddy, book club tomorrow.
It's going to be on fire. And it is, right? So we pick the books. I mean, they're popular books within the homeschool world. We hear a lot about them. We don't pre-read them. I mean, this is our learning experience. And so some of them we're going to agree with and some of them we're not. And wait until you hear what the author says in this section. So you're definitely going to want to tune in to week 4 book club. Juliana, thank you so much for joining us for today, for sharing a bit about your co-ops. We're super excited for your learning adventures that are coming in the fall. And we hope to have you back so that you could tell us how it all went.
I would love to come back. This is fun.
For sure. That sounds great.
I love it. Well, have an awesome rest of your day, everyone. Keep on homeschooling.